Hi everybody! I thought that with Halloween coming soon, it might be fun to make a sort of a spooky video. So today I'll be illustrating and reading aloud to you a story called Bells in Her Hair, written by me. I wrote it. A brief note before I start, the main character of this story is called Aubrey, and if you're a reader of my comic, it's not the same Aubrey. I just like the name. So without further ado, here we go. Bells in Her Hair by Ophelia. "Don't know much about it," the old man had said when Mother had asked about the cottage. "My old dad built the main house some 80-odd years ago." He had a prickly gray chin which wobbled over his chicken neck as he spoke. "'Twas standing then, and for centuries before that, I'd wager." This was during the dull and drawn-out process by which the property changed hands. Much standing about in soggy grass, pointing at things, much signing of forms, and much listening to sleepy old people gummily recount idyllic childhood tales in nearly unintelligible accents. These sorts of proceedings made Aubrey every bit as restless and irritable as when he was a child. It didn't matter to Aubrey when the little store building had been erected, or what was known about it or unknown. As he stood in front of the lichen-laced walls under the thatch of ancient gray trees, all that mattered to Aubrey was that the cottage was his. At first Mother had been doubtful. "Why not stay in this room?" she had said, gesturing hopefully to a fair-sized room with whitewashed walls. "I'd rather use that building as storage. It couldn't possibly be suitable to live in." But in the end, Aubrey's pleas had prevailed. He was enthralled with the cottage from the instant he caught sight of it. It crouched like a small gray cat, hidden in the dense and dripping forest. Its ancient moss-festooned stones planted firmly in a thicket of thorny weeds, birds' nests in the exposed rafters of the long-since rotten thatch roof, and puddles gathering in the broad sills of its small glassless windows. There was something inexplicably hypnotic about it, something rather akin to the mysterious half-smile in the eye of a portrait whose subject, unknown, is long dead. And yet there was something unspeakably strange which made it all the more enchanting. Aubrey had taken it upon himself to conduct the needed repairs. In the meantime, however, he fully intended to live in it as it was, much to his mother's dismay. Grinning, Aubrey hoisted his backpack up by the straps, and picking up his heavy crate of art things, stepped through the low door. The floor was hard-packed dirt, cold and damp-smelling. Aubrey supposed they had probably kept the livestock in there in the time that this house was occupied. Sheep or something. He'd heard they used to do that. He shifted his grip on the unwieldy crate so he could see as he started up the sagging wooden stairs. The slats moaned and whimpered with each testing step he took, and rotten little splinters grabbed at his shoelaces like tiny impish hands attempting to trip him up. At the head of the stair was a small square landing, surrounded by plastered wooden walls. In one of these was a faded door with large, coarse-looking hinges. Aubrey carefully maneuvered himself and his box around the corner, and stopped a moment to catch his breath and reflect proudly on not having fallen down the staircase. As he moved to push open the rough-hewn door, Aubrey thought he heard a gentle padding sound, as of something moving around on the other side. "A squirrel?" he guessed, shrugging. It figured that there would be some animals in there. After all, the cottage had belonged to them longer than to humans. Aubrey didn't mind a few animals. He leaned on the heavy door, which, sticking a moment, gave way with a rusty and mournful protest. A swarm of dust motes took flight, startled from their resting place on the coarse planked floor. Aubrey nudged the crate inside with his feet, and looked up through the skeletal frame of the roof, breathing deep the sweet, strange scent of decay and plant life. There were patches of musty leaf litter which had fallen through the ceiling, and a little curling vine had climbed its way purposefully through the window to twine about the cracked plaster wall. Aubrey decided he would leave it there, even after he had fixed things up. The room was a sort of an uneven L shape, being for the most part a mid-sized rectangle, but continuing round the corner into a small alcove which ran parallel to the landing on the other side of the wall. Pale green-gray shafts of dust-speckled light filtered through the gaps in the ceiling. Aubrey surveyed it all with the pride of home ownership. His own stone cottage, his own artist's studio, his own ancient mystery which belonged only to himself and the forest. He went back to the main house for the broom, then again to fetch more of his belongings, and then again to snatch an armful of foodstuffs to squirrel away. By the time dusk swooped in and the last light trickled down behind the hills, Aubrey had settled in quite nicely. His art things were all arranged as he liked them, beside the square and tunnel-like window, his knickknacks laid out on a shelf pilfered from among his family's living-room furniture, and his mattress placed in a corner of the room opposite the alcove, across which he had strung a faded gingham sheet as a kind of partition. He hadn't decided what to do with the space behind it yet, but he liked the arrangement quite well. As the sky faded out entirely and darkness suffused the room like thick black ink, it occurred to him that he had neglected to bring a torch with him from the main house. He didn't suppose it mattered, though. He didn't mind the dark. He stretched out contentedly on the mattress and shortly drifted into sleep. It was near dawn when the curtain stirred. The faint blue corpse light of the early hours had woken Aubrey. His eyes creaking stickily open for a moment, as they fluttered briefly, he saw it. What it was he couldn't say, only that something, or perhaps someone, had stirred vaguely in the dim light, and disappeared behind the curtain before he could rub the sleep from his startled eyes. Aubrey sat blinking. What in the world had it been? It certainly appeared to be a human form, but surely Aubrey would have heard the heavy creaking door had someone entered. Slowly, with slight apprehension, he stepped barefoot from his bed to throw back the curtain and peer into the alcove. As he had expected, it was empty. Aubrey laughed. "I'm being stupid," he said. Obviously he had dreamt it, but still he couldn't shake the image of someone softly crossing the floor in the sickly blue shade of the morning. He didn't bother about going back to bed, but instead sat down with the sketching pad for a while, wondering at the subtle tremor of his hand. When day broke fully, Aubrey set about shoring up the staircase. It wouldn't do to have his foot go crashing through the moldy timbers. To be fair, he didn't quite know how to go about repairing it properly, but after a few hours he felt sufficiently satisfied with the result, and walked up to the main house to have dinner with his family. At the table, chewing idly on a bit of bone, Aubrey felt briefly and inexplicably tempted to ask to move his things back and take the upstairs room after all. But the moment he parted his lips to speak, it left him, and he was quite appalled at himself for such a moment of cowardice. He returned to the stone cottage after dinner, this time reminding himself pointedly to grab the torch, and toyed about with some paints while humming a little song of his own invention. When the sun was no longer forthcoming to such enterprise, he read a while by the buzzing beam of bottled yellow light, then went to sleep. This time he awoke well before dawn. The room was still drowned in syrupy blackness. For a moment Aubrey couldn't tell what had awoken him, until it pricked at his ears. A gentle chinking sound, a chorus of little metal raindrops. It came from the other side of the door. Aubrey lay silent, rapt, like a child waiting for the arrival of Father Christmas. Who did the ringing on the stair herald? Aubrey gazed intently at the stars that broke through his ceiling. His heart beat heavily. He reached his hand slowly through the thickness of shadow to grasp the neck of an empty wine bottle, as though it might serve as a weapon. He couldn't quite say why he was so frightened, why each little tinkling of the bell sent splinters of ice prickling through his limbs, or made his throat so tight and dry, and he couldn't quite say why he didn't want them to cease. He stayed on his back, clutching the bottle and staring until morning, when the sun melted away the icy little bells, and left Aubrey with only birdsong and rustling trees. For the remainder of the day Aubrey felt rather pensive. He found himself sitting on the floor, wondering with a strange sense of sorrow just who had lived there and when. He picked up his sketchbook and began to scratch about thoughtfully. Nearly a week passed, and Aubrey did not surface from the cottage. His mother was beginning to worry. On the 6th day Aubrey's younger brother ascended the wooden stair and rapped at his door. "Are you still alive in there?" he heard Colin's muffled inquiry. "Of course I am. What do you want?" he answered impatiently, frantically rubbing out a line he had just drawn. "Mother sent me to check on you. You haven't come up in ages," Colin said in exaggerated tones. "I'm fine, I have food," Aubrey said brusquely. "What are you doing in there, anyway?" Colin lay on the floor trying to peer through the crack beneath the door. Aubrey gave no answer. "Did you hear me? Aubrey, can't you let me in?" he persisted. Aubrey sighed. He wouldn't see success with this picture anyway. He rose shakily from hours in one spot and undid the latch which he had nailed up. "Thank you," Colin said dramatically, as though he'd been on the landing all day. "So what are you doing?" He started curiously into the room, then stumbling slightly, taken aback. The room was littered with drawings, paintings, sketches in charcoal, pastel, ink. Scarcely an inch of space remained unburied by this peculiar snow. Most striking, however, was not the quantity of the pictures, but the subject. Every last one of them was of a girl, the same girl, with slight variations from picture to picture. "What is all this?" Colin asked with a mixture of astonished amusement and vague horror. "I'm trying to draw her, the one who lived here," Aubrey explained, picking up a watercolor and frowning at it in distaste. "How do you know who lived here?" Colin asked, bewildered and slightly outraged at such nonsense. "I don't," Aubrey admitted. "It's just a feeling. Which is why I can't seem to get it right." He crumpled the painting, folding the girl's face in on itself. "Maybe you should come back to the house, Aubrey," Colin suggested, looking a bit concerned. "I don't want to. I wanted a place to draw, that's what I'm doing here. It's fine." He picked up a stub of charcoal and set back to work. Defeated, Colin closed the door, which dragged a few papers behind it, and disappeared. Aubrey sighed. He supposed it would seem a little mad, sitting alone drawing the same picture again and again and again. But the thing was, it wasn't the same picture. He had yet to draw the right one. All the others were rubbish. Again he worked until dark, and then stood stretching and shaking the cramps from his tired hands, and went to bed. This time, when Aubrey awoke in the half-light of pre-dawn, there was no sound, nor any fleeting vision which stirred him. He lay awake a while, wondering at the silence. For some reason it was more chilling than the previous night's sensations. "I suppose there's nothing, then," he thought at length, and rolled onto his side to return to sleep. And then he saw it. There, at the bottom of his old gingham curtain, was a small foot, pale and jarring in the dark of the room. Aubrey was motionless, his eyes pried wide by cold astonishment. His breath caught in his throat as the curtain shifted slowly aside, and she peered wordlessly out at him a moment. Naked and white in the moonlight, she stepped from out of the alcove. Her hair was a wild mass of matted elf locks, and throughout it hung a number of little silver bells, which shivered gently with every slight movement of her head, and chimed like tiny metal raindrops. Thanks for listening, everyone. I hope this story gave you a spook. Please like and subscribe, and if you came here from my comic, hello. If you didn't come here from my comic, I write a comic. It's called Out of This Room on Webtoon. Go read it if you want. That's all for now. Bye!